Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and a big welcome to our webinar today on shaping your future, creating and delivering an impactful public sector strategy. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant. I'll be chairing today's webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house which works with civil servants in the UK and all around the world. And I'd also like to really thank our knowledge partner today, PA Consulting, for all of their support in this event and for also sharing their expertise with us as part of the panel discussion today. So in terms of what we'll be talking about, here in the UK, like other governments around the world, civil servants are all facing really significant challenges, whether that's economic challenges, technological changes, social changes. And on top of that, we've obviously had most recently the COVID pandemic that lots of government departments and government organisations have been dealing with. But even as we come out of that pandemic, and tentatively now we're hopefully seeing some light at the end of the COVID tunnel, for the UK in particular, this is going to be a very kind of a new place as we've left the European Union, a new place on the global stage. We're finding our way through that new place that we have. All of those things means it's really important, more important than ever, that even in these times when we might feel like we're firefighting, it's important that we lift our heads, maintain a kind of sense of where we want to go and be able to develop those effective strategies that keep us going on the right course. Now, today we have a brilliant, they're going to share some examples of the strategy work that they are doing. I'm going to ask each of them in a moment to give us an opening presentation, but actually we will also have an opportunity to take questions from all of you here, our audience. So you should be able to see on your screens or tablets, however you're watching this, there'll be a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. At any point while you are listening, please feel free to message in your questions. And after our panelists have spoken, we will take as many of those questions as we possibly can. So now I'm going to introduce a panel member. We have 4 brilliant speakers today. We will first hear from Lieutenant General Chris Tikel in the British Army. Chris was commissioned into the Royal Engineers in 1983, and he rose steadily within the ranks. And at various stages throughout his career, he has commanded troops in lots of countries around the world, but including Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And in 2013, Chris was promoted to head the Army's Recruiting and Training Division, after which he became the Army's Director of Capability from 2016-19. And at that point, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and became Deputy Chief of the General Staff. And it's really good to have Chris with us today because we don't often get that perspective of somebody who's kind of really worked in the field, but also has that central government strategic understanding. After Chris, we'll hear from Ellie Lusty, who is Head of People Strategy, Organisation Design and Development and People Insight at the Department for Work and Pensions. Ellie has led development of DWP's people strategy, working with ex-department to set the future ambition for DWP's workforce, and that really underpins the department's business strategy. Prior to this, Ellie led work to create a single customer service group in HMRC, bringing nearly 30,000 people directly serving HMRC's diverse customer base together under the same leadership. Then we'll hear from Alex Catlin, who is Head of Strategy Consulting for our knowledge partner, PA Consulting, and he's got 15 years experience helping clients right in the sector to improve their leadership and transform their organization's performance. Alex's work covers all aspects of strategy, governance, business planning and transformation. And he's really helped large multidisciplinary teams in government departments as well as FTSE 100 companies to implement reforms that improve delivery and business outcomes. And last, but by no means least, we'll hear from Adam Simmons. Adam is Director of Future Road Investment Strategies and Government Relations at Highway, responsible for producing the evidence to inform the 5-year investment in England's motorways and major A roads, and producing the agency's delivery plan. And to give you some sense of scale of that, in 2020, Highways England agreed a 27.4 billion investment in strategic roads for the period of 2020 to 2025. Adam is also responsible for producing Highways England's first net zero carbon strategy and plan and working with government on the COVID response. And before joining HE, Department for Transport, where he was a senior member of the leadership team there in that department. So I'm sure you'll agree we have a fantastic panel with us here today. Please do take this opportunity to pick their brains and send in your questions. But without further ado, because we want to maximise as much time as we've got, I'm going to hand over to Chris, to give us his opening remarks. Over to you.
Siobhan, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Great privilege to be able to speak to you this morning. In the sort of 5 or 6 minutes I've got, I thought I'd just give you any we've been on in terms of formulating our strategy within the Army. But before I did so, just a couple of words about my responsibilities, which may help set a bit of context. I think the commercial sector would probably say that I am in effect the chief executive of the Army, and we have a workforce of about 140,000 people, which is regular soldiers, reserve soldiers, civil servants, and of course contractors. We have an operating budget of about 11 per annum, and that covers our people costs, our equipment costs, infrastructure, and of course our activity, i.e. training, which keeps us current on a day-to-day basis. In terms of my 3 focus areas, the 3 things that I sort of worry about on a, if you like, on a daily basis. One is about the future for the Army, and of course that plays into strategy. One is about our people and how we're developing them and retaining them. And one is about strategic affordability, which of course all that we do. I've been in post for about 18 months. And it's just important to note, in terms of setting the context of what I'm about to say, that of course our strategy, the Army strategy, is nested within defence's strategy, which in itself is nested in the government's positioning. And at the moment, you'll know well that there's much talk about global Britain, and therefore adjusting our strategy to meet that level of ambition that the government has is really important. Next bit I would just say is, of course, that we can get blown off course by events, self-evidently, whatever is happening in the world or indeed nationally. And of course, COVID is a good example of that. So inevitably, we did a bit of a deep dive on our strategy when I arrived, because I felt that was probably a good thing to do. And I have to say, I was brilliantly helped by one member of the panel today. And we found a number of things, frankly, awry with our strategy. First of all, we had a strategy that weren't necessarily nested in each other. And therefore, because they weren't nested, we couldn't really work out what the dependencies were between one level and another. I think we'd muddled strategy with, frankly, business processes and annularity of the business. And therefore, again, we were worrying about the minutiae of the day-to-day detail and not focusing on actually what the long-term sort of 3 to 5 year effect, and very much focused on business as usual, as opposed to, as I say, that future. We were rewriting our strategy remarkably regularly, not helped by the significant turnover of senior officers we'd had relatively recently. So almost every year we were rehashing a strategy. And of course, that wasn't helping anybody in terms of maintenance of the effort. And we had too many priorities, which meant, of course, that the staff didn't really understand focus should be, and it really didn't help us in terms of resourcing those priorities either. And finally, we had an executive that was not adequately resourced to manage the strategy anyway. So even if we'd had one, it would have been very difficult to understand really where we were on our journey. And that also manifested itself in our lack of ability to manage our performance because the executive wasn't working right, and I frankly couldn't tell on a monthly basis how well we were doing, and who, frankly, to tweak or not. So driving performance was really tricky. So what did we do? We rewrote our vision and purpose, which you may say, well, for an army should be pretty straightforward. It's remarkable how many hours we spent wordsmithing relatively few sentences. We rewrote our strategic objectives. We had, believe it or not, we had about 30 strategic objectives. We necked it down to 5 because we felt. But we introduced a subsidiary layer of what I describe as ExCo objectives. I chair the executive committee monthly, and we as a board have responsibility for the 13, slightly unfortunate number, but 13 objectives that we run as a board, and they all contribute to those 5 strategic objectives. And underneath those objectives, underneath the 13, we agreed a series of deliverables that my 2-star directors would own that contributed to meeting those objectives. And it's worth saying that the deliverables we had prior to this review numbered some about 330. So again, it was really tricky to understand where the racking and stacking was and what was really important. And of course, the final bit we did was we rewrote our sort of our MI, business intelligence requirements so that we could track activity better. So where do we end up now? So there's a danger I will describe how brilliant everything is now, because I'm obviously responsible. So Alex will probably give you a better view. But I think, as I chair the monthly ExCo, I am able to hold my sort of 10 or so 2-star directors properly to account in terms of what they are responsible for delivering. We as the executive committee have responsibility for delivering the ExCo objectives and with them the strategic objectives. And it's not just about holding people to account, it's obviously them if they are struggling because they haven't got the right resource or they haven't got the right tools. And that therefore I can veer and haul, and it's not perfect at the moment, but I can veer and haul resources, which is really important. And I think what was interesting is that when we hit COVID last March, self-evidently we were slightly blown off course. We were able to review all our deliverables and our objectives. We'd already racked and stacked them as must, coulds, and shoulds. And I just at a stroke deleted all the coulds in order to create resource for people to worry about the COVID response. And that really did underline, I think, the efficacy of what we've been through. Now, if I just reflect on, if you like, on the last 18 months, it has definitely been a full-time effort. It's been a full-time effort for me in terms of the sort of leadership responsibilities, and it's been a full-time full-time responsibility for directors and below to get after this. You can't just do it half-heartedly. And with that, it's got to be what we would describe as command-led, and therefore I personally put quite a lot of equity into it. Creating the right atmosphere has been key. Clearly you've got to do this with people. At times, though, the sort of slightly level of steel has got to come out and say, yeah, this is all very interesting, but actually this is what we're doing. If you don't like it, time to find other things to do. And I haven't had to do that much, but it is important to be able to do it if you need. But I do think as a result, we have a business that is, and I say business deliberately, because at this level, it does become a business, notwithstanding, what our young men and women do in the field. We have got a business that is much better focused. I do think we're more efficient. And I think we're worrying about the important things as opposed to the urgent. We were really worried about when we started that we weren't able to do that. Siobhan, I think that's me, if that's helpful.
Fantastic and perfect timing. Thank you so much. That's such a good introduction, because I think you've really touched on some of the key issues there. One, the kind of uniqueness maybe of which will be really important for our audience of setting strategies in that kind of government context. So you're one service within a wider department within the wider government setting. I think that's unique to working in parts of the public sector. And then really really understanding that revise the strategy. If you find you're doing it all the time, there's probably something not right there. The idea of simplifying your number of strategies, objectives and deliverables so it's more manageable. And because of that, how much you could hold then people to account for delivering on the things that are really most important. And then finally, really like what you say, which I think other people will probably touch on, the importance of leadership and also knowing when to have closure, because certainly when I was in the civil service, talking about strategy is something that could otherwise go on and on and on, and you're kind of in a constant kind of conversation about it. Thank you so much, Chris. That's perfect. I'm going to come over to Ellie for your thoughts. Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks, Siobhan, and hi everyone. It's good to be here talking to you this morning. As Siobhan said in her introduction, so I'm responsible for the people strategy in DWP, which was an organisation of about 70,000 people in March last year, and by March this year it will be 100,000 people. But actually this is a job I've been in for a couple of years, and most of the work we did to develop our current people strategy we did in 2019. So I'm not going to tell you a story that's hugely coloured by COVID, because our focus in the last year has been on keeping the organisation running. We're just starting that refresh and that look at the strategy again based on what we've learned in this last year. What I am going to do is tell you a story that's covered by kind of how I am as a strategist. So I'm not the great visionary who's going, oh, this thing's coming 5 years over the horizon that no, and I'm not the kind of asking the unthinkable question disruptor, but I am the person who joins the dots. And I think, in the context of being a public sector strategist, that's really important. How do you understand what's around you and connect the dots between where you are now, where you want to be, and what then needs to be true to kind of make that a reality? So DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions in the UK, many of you will know we deliver support to millions of citizens every year, and it's all done through people. So of course we've got thousands and thousands of people delivering services directly to citizens, but we've also got people developing policies, experts in change management, in HR and finance. Everything's done by people. And the people strategy is about saying, what's the vision for a workforce of 100,000 people? How do we strive to be an exemplar employer and somewhere that's a great place to work and that attracts and keeps the great people we need? But also, how does the people strategy help us achieve our priorities as an organisation, as a department, and what does that mean for our workforce? What does our workforce need to enable? And so the kind of three areas I thought I'd talk about are alignment, which is linked to Chris's concept of nesting, I think, co-creation, and then ensuring that strategy that comes out at the end is simple and durable and lasts in the organisation. So alignment first. As you know, civil services and of course the wider public sector, it's a big, knotty, interrelated system. We have priorities that are set politically, we have priorities set within the civil service, we have priorities set for the public sector as a whole, we have priorities set in departments. So in somewhere like DWP, you've got multiple related strategies. You've got priorities to deliver for the Secretary of State, you've got a business strategy setting out organisational ambition. We talk in DWP about 4 key enabling strategies: people, place, digital and data. And then there's a whole host of more detailed underpinning strategic plans and documents. And I talk about being responsible for a people strategy for the whole organisation, but I work alongside over 200 HR business partners who support different parts of DWP to take that and have that and connect it to the people plans for their part of the organisation. And in their turn, they're supporting leaders who are accountable for thousands of people in their own right and need to lead out on what matters to their people. So what does that tell us? You're going to reflect back on it. Aside from the fact we massively overuse the word strategy, I think as a strategist, you have to know and respect your spot in that hierarchy. I have to know that whilst I'm responsible for the people strategy, that's about enabling DWP's business strategy. And that's about aligning with the civil service ambition for modernisation, for great people as part of that. And then I set a framework under which my colleagues set the capability strategy, the inclusion strategy, the people priorities for different teams. But you can't be passive in that relationship. So you've got to be reaching out all the time and aligning and influencing. And so if I look upwards, I'm there, at civil service level, what have I got a responsibility to do? I've got a responsibility to bring the perspective of a huge service delivery organisation with 80% of people in frontline delivery to bear in a strategy development process that can be about Whitehall and the dynamics of the kind of smaller policy-led departments in Whitehall, and bringing our priorities and our challenges to the table, showcasing where we're leading out on new innovations and kind of influencing that kind of overarching strategy. And then in the department, I'm there alongside my business strategy colleagues. I'm joining the dots, and I'm not allowing people as a kind of consideration to be seen in isolation, but it's something that's embedded. So every choice that our executive team are making about what we deliver, about how we deliver it, those people implications and the connection to that strategic vision are seen as they are making those choices. And then if I'm looking downwards, and that's completely the wrong term because it sounds pejorative and I don't mean it in that way, but I have a responsibility to make it easy for my HR business partners, colleagues, to take the people strategy, to talk about it, to relate priorities in their area back to the overarching strategy. So I'm going to nick that word again, so that everything nests together. It's a really lovely analogy of it. And that brings me on to co-creation, the second thing I said I'd talk about. So I think in the civil service, we're pretty great at stakeholder engagement. We know the people we need to keep on side. We know how to tell people what we're doing. But it's co-creation, kind of really genuine collaborative development that strengthens strategy and lifts it off a page. And ideally, I'd say that's co-creation with two audiences. So your expert audience who deliver the changes that get you from where you are now to where you want to be. So in my case, that's the HR experts in DWP. And the second audience, the people who are impacted by the strategy, who you want to feel inspired by that future and their role in it. In my case, that's all the people working in DWP. And I think if I reflect, I think in DWP, we did a good job of co-creating the strategy with the experts and with business leaders. We did less of the grassroots engagement. The appetite wasn't really there in the organisation. And that's something I'd say, actually, how do you do more of that? How do you grow from the day-to-day experiences of the vast majority of people to understand and create your future together? Where I do think we did a good job in DWP is creating a strategy that's simple and durable, and something that then can be used to paint a picture for everyone in the organisation. So our people strategy says we've got an ambition for an organisation that's flexible, inclusive and continuously learning. So there are 6 strategic outcomes that sit under that. There are more granular statements of intent, but at the highest level, flexibility that works for us as a business and for the people who work for us, wholeheartedly signing up to the civil service ambition to be the most inclusive employer in the UK, and a culture of continuous learning. They're really simple, they're clear and they're memorable. And so the expert community know what they're aiming for, they know how their work contributes. The vision works as design criteria for them to say, how is the work I am doing contributing to this ambition to be more flexible, more inclusive, more continuously learning? And it helps us tell the story right across the department about what it means to be in DWP and what DWP will be as the future. And then just to kind of close then, it says, actually what's really critical, and that's also apolitical. So you all know political leadership changes, and that changes priorities for the civil service, and a durable public sector strategy has to stand up to that change. And for me, that's about, you separate out the what, which is the policy outcome which ministers set as our goals, and then the how, which is how we as a department aim to improve the way we operate, which ultimately makes it easier to deliver ministerial priorities as they change. So I think, Siobhan, that's me. It's kind of, you keep focused on the how, you keep it simple, you co-create, and you recognise where you sit in that hierarchy, that bigger kind of strategic jigsaw. You've got a good chance of impactful deliverable strategy.
Thanks, Ellie. I think that's really good in that it kind of complements what Chris said in his opening presentation, and it highlights that wherever you are in the civil service kind of structures, strategy might be something different to you. It might mean something different, but actually it's about joining those dots and getting that alignment if it's going to be effective and everybody working together. But also, I think similarities in what you've both said in terms of the need for co-creation and the need to bring people with you on this kind of strategy development, and also the need to have something that at the end of the day is simple enough for everybody, whether you're a minister or an external stakeholder or a member of staff, to be able to understand and get behind that strategy. And you introduced another unique element, I think, which is we all work in a very political context, but actually a lot of what we do has to be apolitical. It has to stand that test of time, regardless of who the administration is. Thanks very much, Ellie. I'm going to come over to Alex now, who's going to give that slightly different perspective again of kind of the partner view, working with government departments. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. So I think where we'd start is we'd say that the level of challenge facing the public sector at the moment is unparalleled, and it's only matched by an equally unparalleled level of global uncertainty, which means that policy and strategy and the execution of those is more important than ever. Uncertainty has created a renewed imperative for public sector organisations to think and act differently when meeting complex requirements across a range of stakeholders. And government organisations that want to tackle this complexity have the ability to develop and implement strategies that capitalise on the inevitable opportunities that will also arise at times of great change and challenge. Responding to significant policy changes through the provision of multi-year direction, one of the key and most essential things for delivering strategic transformation effectively. And again, as Ellie and Chris have already talked about, there's a need for strategy to bridge the gap between the top level direction set by policy and the strategic transformation that then inevitably needs to follow to deliver on the benefits that are required. However, often when we've been working with folks across the public sector, this gap is quite large, and trying to make that jump from policy to implementation often leads to ineffective delivery and lower than expected returns on investment. Therefore, we believe public sector strategy has a very particular role to play, and it fills that gap between the two. One of the things we've also observed is often there's a tendency to repurpose private sector approaches within the public sector. And in doing so, it sometimes fails to land in the sort of the more unique way that the public sector operates. Therefore, we believe you need a tailored approach to public sector strategy delivery. And furthermore, we believe that there are three components to this which come together to form more of an execution-led approach to strategy. And they are what we call the 3 S's: strategy creation, structural alignment, and strategic value. I'm going to step through each of those now. And the first one is strategy creation. The problem we see most often, which I'm sure many of you will recognise, is the creation of shelfware strategies that don't have the enduring impact or deliver the required benefits that people sometimes expect that they will. Rather than being used as a guiding blueprint for performance improvement, often they're quickly ignored and replaced with either duplicate or more tactical or contradictory thinking. So when we're creating new strategies and we're working with clients to do that, we think about 3 questions. By addressing root causes rather than symptoms, and by being appropriately ambitious, does the strategy provide clarity to everyone in the organisation on what needs to be different? And that phrase different is really important. Does the strategy offer the control required to outline and prioritise a delivery roadmap? Does it take account of lived experience? Does it help to translate what's happening into the value that it will deliver, and therefore the activities that are urgent and important, or as Chris has talked about, important? And how, and this is really important, how do you integrate what you're going to do from your strategy into your existing portfolio of work and your existing activities? It's a real challenge to constantly reinvent your delivery and start again, and it can be really inefficient to do so. And then the third question that we talk about is, and this is really essential, can stakeholders have confidence that the strategy will have a positive impact? And to get that to that place, you need to set out a relevant and inspiring view of the future based on a robust set of diagnostic evidence and clear performance measures. We always talk about the white spaces between stakeholders in the public sector being the most important things when trying to generate new strategies and make sure that they land. So moving on to structural alignment. So let's assume that we've delivered a strategy and it's right and it's good and it's been bought into. I think it's really important to then immediately start to think about the next step, which is how are you set up to execute that strategy? And typically, again, what we observe is that the parts of an organisation responsible for driving and delivering that strategy operate quite often in stovepipes. And rather than collaborating to deliver the strategy, the key business functions can act in an uncoordinated way. making the execution of the strategy inefficient. And often they can counteract one another or even block progress overall. And so therefore, we believe that developing a strong strategic centre, whether that's virtual or physical, and a network of leaders to really live the strategy and lead from the front, it is a really important step in converting forward-looking strategy into a set of impactful activities that will drive things forward. So when executing a strategy, we think that the following things are important. Is the organisation set up to deliver the strategy through the alignment of direction, understanding and activity over a sustained period? And has the organisation brought together the key business functions to take decisions quickly and efficiently, and place, importantly, agility and innovation at the heart of strategy execution? This idea of having fixed periods of strategy and then rewriting it and moving on, and I'll come on to this a bit later, are now, we think, defunct, and actually that agility and innovation is really essential. And then finally, as leaders taking decisions, are you confident that you know what you're delivering, how well you're delivering it, what you need to do to stay on track, whether you can afford your strategy, whether you can buy it, and whether you can resource it. And unless you can answer all of those questions whilst you're going through the execution of your strategy, some take the right decision. So it's likely that every organisation's strategic centre will differ to some degree based on the local context and the organisation's history. And we really do not advocate a one-size-fits-all approach to any of this. However, we do think that all organisations should think about bringing together some key functions to inform their decision-making and drive delivery. And in doing so, generate performance greater than the sum of the parts. The functions that we would often advocate bringing together are a central strategy team, which is usually what we would build the strategic centre around. The portfolio office or the transformation centre of excellence, the design authority, which is a really key part of this, and we can talk more in detail about that maybe in the Q&A. Workforce planning or workforce strategy or people strategy, and IT strategy, which often these days we're seeing more as digital strategy than traditional IT strategy. Finally, we believe it's essential that a single, accurate and freely accessible corporate data set which underpins these decisions is absolutely essential, because two of the biggest challenges that we see along this road is inconsistent data and the lack of corporate memory. And when I say the lack of corporate memory, what I mean is remembering what decisions have been taken and not unpicking them by taking them again further down the track. And then finally, I think I'd want to talk about strategic value. So having the ability to pull the right levers and manage the delivery of your strategy is critical, and it's the only way that you'll get full value from what you've produced. Often we see strategies being refreshed too soon or too late, and this can lead to unmanageable change or even irrelevance, and mean that the organisation's return on investment is diminished. Recognising that it's not necessary to refresh a strategy based on a rigidly defined timescale, or simply because a person has changed. I think again this goes to what Ellie was saying about a responsibility to develop strategies throughout different appointments in government is really essential. And the ability to focus on strategic value and optimise performance can only come from having strong situational awareness of the organisation's collective inputs, outputs and outcomes. And we advocate a proactive and open approach to the management of performance, risks and issues, which is accompanied by effective governance and effective escalation through those government structures, so that the leaders and in fact everyone in the organisation remains attuned to the most critical things at any given time. What we do think as well is that we need to give decision makers the means to prioritise their challenges in terms on both the impact of the organisation's mission there and then, but also over time and into the future. Effective governance will improve the likelihood of boards reaching these decisions and commissioning the actions that have the greatest possible impact. There is an old military term which is called the OODA loop, which is observe, orientate, decide and act. Chris will be familiar. It really does apply to when you're governing your strategy and trying to drive it forward and being willing to kind of adjust the tiller on how you go. And then ultimately knowing when a strategy is running out of currency and value and knowing exactly the right time to refresh it. So in conclusion, organizations across the public sector can use this model to set and implement strategy agendas. Dedicating energy to all three parts of this model, not just the first bit, which is the bit where often a lot of the focus goes on, which is the creation of the strategy, but also thinking how you're set up to execute the strategy and then how you're governing and taking decisions to keep is really, really important. And we believe that if adopting these three approaches, organisations in the public sector can drive delivery faster and can generate more benefit and ultimately more return on investment.
Great, thanks so much, Alex. It's really interesting to get the sense of the kind of the approach that you take when working with government departments and that methodology that you apply. I like that kind of the vision of strategy being the gap, can fill the gap between the top level policy direction and implementation. And again, building on things that both Chris and Ellie said there about the importance of getting the governance and the leadership right, bringing all the different elements together within the department to work together. But also, I think something that might come out in the discussion as well, that you can help departments and leaders think through the timing of when they should be revising a strategy, when maybe it's kind of run its course, or that kind of more agile approach to kind of keeping the strategy fresh. Thanks so much, Alex. Really good to hear all of that. And last but definitely not least, we come to Adam. Over to you, Adam.
Good morning, everyone. Very good to be here today. As Siobhan introduced at the start of the session, my name's Adam. I'm one of the directors in our strategy and planning group in Highways England. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of setting the 5-year strategy and plan for the 5-year road period we're in now, road period 2, but also where we are now and starting to look ahead to the next road period as well, because they tend to follow the same 5-year cycles of planning. Just by way of some introduction, Highways England was set up in 2015 as a new government company. We were a Highways agency before. The reason why I particularly flag that, because I think it's quite relevant to this discussion about strategy and how we set strategy. Highways agency with the Department of set annual investment decisions, annual plans. And the idea with setting up the company through a process that was called Road to Reform was that it would be, as well as bringing in efficiencies and so on of being a more arm's length body and company would bring, it would really focus on setting roads strategy over a 5-year period. And given Highways England is responsible for the motorways and major A roads of the country, and covering carrying 1/3 of all traffic and 2/3 of all freight, clearly a really important asset for government that impacts the whole country, the whole of the economy. One thing I was reflecting on, I was just adding to my notes as I was listening to the other speakers, is that very early on as a company, we settled on 3 what we call imperatives, which is safety as perhaps our overall overriding imperative, delivery, focus on delivery, and company. We were set up to have a closer link with identifying customer needs and responding to those on the strategic road network. The evolution that we've been through is that in 2015, the road investment strategy was set probably very quickly, entirely appropriately. So that first road period, a lot of the focus of the company was thinking about what that means to be a company, have this slightly different focus. At the same time, we would develop for 2020 to 2025. And the ambition was very much around about now, actually, was the point at which we'd really bring those benefits of roads reform. Very much an evidence-based process still absolutely acknowledging the role of government and the Secretary of State as ultimate decision maker, but very much having that evidence there. The process that we've rather settled on, I'll talk a little bit about, is really four steps or direction. It's about then developing the evidence around how we might achieve certain outcomes, bringing it all together, and then it's important to write it down. The first one there on setting the overall direction, I think is a couple of things to dwell on. There are, with delivering a road service for customers, for commercial and private customers, moving freight, moving people, moving services, there are also a range of things we need to look at, responsibilities we have as a company to deliver that service to our customers. I sort of reflect that there are things that we consistently need to do from one road period to another, so have a certain commonality from one strategy to another. But equally then it's thinking about the priorities and the focus of each strategy. For the strategy and the road period we're in now, we put a lot of focus into saying that perhaps over successive investment cycles in renewing the existing asset. So we put a lot of time and effort into making that case to government about renewals investment. And as many companies and organizations are facing now, clearly environment and the digital agenda will be really critical. So it's important to have those sense of what government is looking for, what's the broader political context, what our customers are demanding, but what are the broader societal trends that we're responding to. In terms of bringing I won't dwell on this, but I think it's knowing what outcomes we're trying to achieve, understanding how government and Treasury in particular makes its investment decisions. It is important to think about how we tailor our evidence and bring that together, but probably echoing a point that I think Ellie was making, really important that we use the expertise within the company to make that case, make that evidence. In terms of bringing it together, worth reflecting on this. Our strategy had a number of different strands, a number of different things, areas of investment we wanted to focus on, and really important that we provide evidence for each. But it only really makes sense as a strategy if it's in the round. We did this by really having the master financial sheet, and it enabled us to keep asking the question, is this strategy overall fundamentally deliverable? And is it striking that right balance with being challenging? Because we want to make the most of taxpayers' money. And sometimes there's a risk if you look at things in isolation, one makes small tweaks, small cuts, which seem perfectly innocent, but added all up together, it suddenly erodes the strategy or makes it undeliverable. So it's really important. And then the last point there about actually writing it down and creating the documents has two important things. It gives that line of sight to our own company, lets people know, well, if fundamentally I'm doing something that meets our strategic business plan, meets our imperatives, then I'm pretty much doing the right thing. And it gives that certainty to our supply chain and our customers as well. And I think that shift from annual to 5-year cycle really helps sort of give that focus. One thing I would add, and others have talked about, particularly things that could also or little bumps in the road. COVID, of course, and other things happen. I think by having that solid 5-year plan, it gives that stability, a background against which one can be agile and one can react. We were able to, during COVID, actually crack on and continue to do a lot of our delivery and operation of the network. The plan was there, the funding was there, we knew what we were doing. We could say to the supply chain, keep going. But we could obviously react and adapt and support government in the overall response to that. And certainly with the environment agenda, we knew it was going to be important, but it's clearly high up on the agenda of the Prime Minister and this government. And we're able to respond and react to that without having to almost worry about the broader strategy. That's there, and we can now react in an agile way. I think I'll pause there Plenty that we can talk about in discussion, but hopefully that's given you a good flavour of how we've gone about it here in Highways England.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Adam. Really good to hear kind of from as a relatively new organisation, how useful having that strategic thinking from the start has been, the lessons that you learned from kind of going through several rounds of that. You brought in other elements, which I think some of our audience will be really interested in as well, the importance of having evidence underpinning your strategy when it comes to things like dealing with Treasury for spending decisions, really, really important for a lot of people, especially as we come out of COVID, I think when finances are going to be incredibly tight. And then also you brought in the aspect of how having a strategy is helpful for giving certainty to customers and to, but also helping to keep some semblance or some normality in business as usual, even when big shocks as major as kind of COVID and Brexit, for example, hit your business as usual. So really, really interesting. Thank you so much to all our panel members. A reminder to the audience, please do send any questions. We've already had a couple sent in, and I'm going to combine two questions. We had one sent in advance from Emma McGrath, who's from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and there's one on the line. I'm going to combine panel members. So the question from Emma was, what advice would you give to current civil servants who are going through lots of restructuring and constant change processes? And how do you kind of influence and change mindsets of staff that maybe don't want to or are struggling to change their thinking and ways of doing things? And I want to combine that with a question that came in after, which is, how do you tackle the middle management permafrost that often inhibits transition from strategy to implementation? Are kind of related. I'm going to change the order just a little bit. Ellie, I'm going to come to you first because this is very much a people-focused question, I think.
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, in both contexts, how do you help people who are dealing with a lot of ambiguity and a lot of change? How do you help? You know, we talk about middle management permafrost. It kind of implies a problem, and I would go, how do you put yourself in the shoes of those people, understand what's going on for them in their context and in their environment, what they're being asked to do, and as you can transit, you can understand what you're asking people to do and what level of change and level of difference you're asking them to kind of live up to, and you have to then ask yourself whether that's fair and whether that's realistic. So, you know, we in DWP we have, you know, middle managers. Okay, if you're in service delivery, you start at the front line delivering services directly to customers. You're great at that, so we promote you to manager. You're good at being a manager, so we promote you up, and we talk about you as a leader, and we don't really equip you to make that shift from being a manager and managing the kind of nuts and bolts of the work to leading. And then actually we ask you to manage a huge amount of tension and pressure in the system. You're constantly balancing to say, well, are we matching up our people capacity to meet the demands of customers? Are we delivering? Are we managing our metrics? And we don't give them much time to step back and even have any space. You know, we give people to kind of pause and reflect. So you have to, I think, if you kind of really want to support people and help people change their mindsets, you have to put yourself in their shoes and say what's going on for them, what are we trying to ask them to do, and what's their reality, and how do those things align or conflict, and if they're conflicting, what then do you strip back to allow them to think through, kind of make that step to the future.
Right.
I think we also think about where is the permafrost, because actually, and this might take us to some of the other questions, it's not necessarily our middle managers. I think we have kind of strategic change communities that can tie themselves in knots, debating strategic choices that really were made some time ago. And that's back to the point Chris was making about where does the leadership then cut through and say we're into doing mode, we're into getting done, and drive that through the organisation.
Brilliant, thank you. Chris, I'm going to come to you then. So this sense of, is this something that you recognise in terms of, you know, constantly being asked to do change programs? Is there a reluctance, a resistance to do that? And is there a permafrost at kind of middle management level, and how do we cut through that?
Yeah, so I mean, I completely recognise the challenge and the question, and I think there is undoubtedly sort of change fatigue, if you like, probably in most organisations because of this permanent ebb and flow. I mean, the glib answer, I think, is that is just the way we are nowadays, and that you sort of, one has to embrace the fact that it is a permanent, and actually sort of a search for certainty is always going to end up in a bit of disappointment, I suspect, on an individual basis. But I think, from my point of view, we have a number of different, I guess, audiences as we're driving change, because we have the military, who are relatively transient in an appointment. So, the officers that come into this headquarters are in post for 2 years, and then I'll go back into the field army and sort of lead young men and women. And whereas our civil servants brilliantly provide that continuity for us. And then also we have contractual support, which may be actually relatively short term. And therefore, the first thing I would say is, certainly from my point of view, I absolutely recognize a need to adjust the leadership style depending on the audience you're talking to. It doesn't mean that the ultimate message is different, but you do need to have a different approach because, frankly, I can be more directive with people wearing uniform than perhaps I would be with those that aren't, and that's right and proper. I think my key point, though, in terms of, if you like, the permafrost, which sounds pejorative, but I recognize it, is the critical nature of engagement as you're going through. So I outlined a number of problems that we have with our strategy. Partly they came from my view, but more importantly, they came from the wider diaspora of the headquarters, who were all asked to contribute to what they thought the problems were. So we engaged them at the start. And then as we went through the sort of reiteration of objectives, et cetera, and deliverables, they were absolutely part of that discussion, so that they felt and hopefully could see some of their contributions both being recognized and then actioned and then played back to them. And we are continuing to do that. But all of that said is that, I think you will always get a proportion that feel very uncomfortable with it. And then again, you end up in a position where either they just are uncomfortable and they will go with it, but slightly through gritted teeth, or they really, really are uncomfortable, in which case this may not be the organization for them. But leadership at every level, and I recognize there's a challenge between sometimes management and leadership. And, frankly, we're lucky in the Army. We've put a lot of effort into leadership right from the moment people arrive. And we're working very hard to invest in our civil servants some of those same skill sets, because we are absolutely about one force. The role of the leader at every level is critical in terms of motivating and listening. And listening is so important. We spend there's a danger that people like me spend our whole time talking, as I am now. So apologies.
So that's what you're here for today. That's
rather than listening. And we have a bit of a mantra that says, you get more senior, you should spend a lot more time listening than you should say doing.
Yeah.
And we're not always, in wearing uniform, we're not always good at that. And we are driving hard to get better at it so that people feel empowered.
Yeah, thanks so much. So really nice, I think both of you there talking about the importance of listening and understanding where other people are coming from, but also the importance of leadership at the end of the day. Adam, is this something that you experience? You talked about setting up the agency as a new organization, but there must have been obviously cultural kind of legacy from previous the agency that was there before. So do you recognize this kind of sense of maybe some people are less willing to engage with new strategies going forward, a bit of a tendency to do things the way they've always done things?
It's an interesting question. I think what I believe is that very, very few people are, if like, intentionally obstructive. I think everyone in an organization, and particularly the organizations represented, here and in the audience, have very skilled, very talented people. And perhaps at times what may come across as reticence perhaps is really showing a passion and a commitment to what people believe and have experience in doing. So I think if strategy, what I believe is perhaps a process of simplification through often very complex, wicked problems that we're trying to solve, be it a new company, a new investment strategy, whatever it happens to be. I think that the job of those of us in strategy and in leadership is to try to explain and give that context. I mentioned earlier that as Highways England, we have our 3 imperatives, an incredibly powerful way to sort of boil down and focus what we're about and what we do. I think as well then when we're developing strategies and we're potentially taking a new direction, to be able to set out as well, the strategy is the way in which we will do those things that you think we need to do. And if I can sort of say, I can't do this on my own, it's not about a strategy and planning team doing it in a locked room, very much wanted to do it with the expertise within Highways England, to reach out, find a way to give everyone a role and a voice, and at times be that translator that turns technical into something that perhaps is a more appropriate ministerial terms is sort of the job at hand. So I think there's a definite facilitative simplification role here that can get the best out of the organisation.
Thanks, Adam. And Alex, I'm going to ask you finally, because you must have dealt with this quite a lot in different organisations that you've worked with across both the public sector and the private sector.
Yeah, so I think during my introduction, I alluded to this idea of lived experience, and I think it's really, really important that when you're dealing with different cultures and the behaviours that come about from those cultures, that you tailor whatever you're doing to the organisation you're in. So as an external partner coming in to work with folks who other panel members on these sorts of problems, we'd be looking to say, so tell us about your people, help us understand your people, and help us really get under the skin of it. I think as well as working with the people to help them adapt to what's going on and accept the strategy, you can also put in place some useful tools to help. As Chris alluded to, change is a part of life now. We used to have this idea of we transform to go back to BAU. We have to, as strategists, be constantly looking at this strategic renewal, because there's no such thing really as a kind of steady state BAU anymore, or at least when we're working with organisations, this is what we see. Inevitably, too much change can lead to paralysis. And I think often that's because folks in the organisation can't see the wood for the trees. They're struggling to understand how they're going to boil the ocean. So to help unlock some of the layers of leadership in the organisation, I'd come back to a couple of things. If there's too much going on, simplify it. Provide that clarity around, this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to impact you. But I'd also look at prioritisation, and I'd look at how often you were refreshing your strategy. The chances are you're refreshing it too often, and that it's not quite as clear the priorities that it's setting out for everyone in the organisation. And the one thing I would say is just moving on from that slightly is we do see, and people do risk creating these kind of zombie strategic portfolios. They're alive and there's stuff going on and there's stuff happening. People are busy and they're tired and they're working really hard, but they're not necessarily seeing what they're doing translating into the delivery of the strategy, or necessarily seeing the results. And often what we see is they're too thinly spread across too many things. And actually going back to, can we prioritize down to the really core things and say, right, let's put more effort into these 3 things, deliver them well, and then move on to the next things, rather than having people doing 3 or 4 things at once, side of the desk activity, which just makes people's life really, really hard.
Thanks. I'm nodding there and unmuting because there are so many questions coming in. I want us to get through as many as we can. Again, I'm going to combine a couple of questions. So quite a few of you touched on COVID and the kind of impact that's had on the work that's done across governments. And as we come out of COVID, as I mentioned before, finances are going to be really tight. And I think there's a danger that departments are going to fall back on firefighting and looking to immediate kind of priorities. And somebody has asked here, how do you make sure that you carve out the headspace within departments to keep some strategic work going and make sure that that's kept as a kind of priority for departments as we come out of COVID? So that's one question. And the other one, which maybe you can answer one or the other, I don't mind, is somebody said they would really welcome your thoughts on how you build winning teams to deal with strategy, and what do you need? I guess that's about what are the skills that you want in people who would take forward your strategy work. Adam, I'm going to come to you. So either on the headspace or kind of what skills do you look for in teams that can do this kind of work?
Sure, I suppose you're right to combine them, Siobhan. There's, actually, it helps to have, I suppose, a strategy team that can spend the time thinking about these things. Although that said, I think what's quite interesting for us in Highways England at the moment is our executive team has said this is something for the whole organisation to be thinking about the longer term strategy. In terms of a high performing team, there's a few skills I guess I reflect on. I mentioned before, often strategy is about a way of working through a very complex issue, and that strict definition of complexity where there's not necessarily a hard answer that says if you do these things you get to the quote solution, but just a way of slowly making things better and working through it. So I think people who are comfortable with that uncertainty and that there isn't a playbook to follow is an important skill. And one thing we talk about within my team, we're a team of 15 supporting a company of over 4,000, is we have to work through others, and we are responsible for the strategy and the overall direction of our investment. We do need to show leadership, but we do want to tread softly. We're not here to tell people what to do or to demand evidence and work by deadlines and so on. I think Ellie mentioned co-creation, and that's for us is absolutely the approach we take. We want to set the context. This is why we're doing it. This is what we're discussing with government, where we want to get to, and we want to work with the experts in the organisation to develop the evidence, develop the plans. So I see us as a very facilitative role there, and that's not an easy skill to have when you're knocking on people's doors when they have very busy day jobs to do, and you're asking a bunch of questions. So my reflections on that.
Thanks, Adam. Chris, going to come over to you. So will post-COVID, will this get neglected, the strategy work, and what skills are you looking for in people to do good strategy work?
Well, I rather hope not. I guess from parochially, not least because we've been sort of knee deep in COVID all the way through and still trying to do our strategy at the same time. I think you've got to be pretty ruthless about the prioritization. So we have deliberately carved out time to take, frankly, the key team away for a whole day on a rolling basis to examine different questions and come up with answers. So, I'm about to take the whole team away for a day virtually, obviously, in a couple of weeks' time, because we on the background of COVID, we need to make some adjustments. But you can't do it by halves. You've got to commit to it. And it goes back to, this is a full-time thing. It's not something you just pull out every year for half a minute to make sure it's right. So it's got to have the investment. I think in terms of the teams, you need the right diversity. I mean, it's a challenge for us, to be quite honest, because we all wear this uniform, and there's we're all conditioned, having been in the organisation for some time. Civil servants and contractor support is brilliant because they test us, and therefore that diversity of thought is really important. And I also think making sure that you have got people that can genuinely have that long-term vision. It's got to be 3, 5, 10 years hence. Yeah. Some people are brilliant at the detail. That's all great, but you've got to have people who've got that long-term vision and get the broader context. Because frankly, within my world, if people are too interested in just what the army is doing, they're missing the point. There's the other services, there's defence, there's wider government. That all of those inputs help create our strategy, and I'm not interested in people that are too inward looking.
Yeah, thanks. If we can squeeze in another round of questions after this, I'll come on to that long-term vision as well. Alex and then Ellie, your thoughts quickly on this headspace and the skills needed.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I think you need to look for people who've got a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. That's not to say that there isn't benefit of having folks who are slightly more fixed in their mindset in an organisation. But if you're starting to look at the future, you really want to be looking at what's going to be different, what's going to change, rather than an evolution of the present. We sometimes call it bigger boat syndrome, faster horse, those sorts of things. And I think what you're looking for is lots of will and resilience in your folks. This is hard. Adam and Ellie and Chris have alluded to this. It's not easy to do. There's some wicked problems there. You need to have will, you need to have skill, but you've got to have resilience as well.
Brilliant, thanks. Ellie.
So yeah, I'm going to pick up on the winning teams question as well. So I think in a strategy team, you need people who can kind of make that leap from, oh, that's interesting, to so what and why, and crystallize that. And you need great team players, and you need people who are really good at looking outwards. But David's question is interesting because it links to how does that inform the organisational people strategy. So in DWP, we're about to launch refreshed values into the organisation that put team working together, being one team, right at the heart of the kind of culture in the organisation. We've got a big push of work with senior leaders about how do you build effective multidisciplinary teams across the organisation to deliver key priorities. And actually, we've ripped up our performance management system. So our priority is not below grade 6, which will be meaningful to the civil servants. Our priority is not individual performance management, it's team-based people performance, teams working together on common objectives and common purpose.
Brilliant, thank you. Before we come to what might be our final round of questions, I just want to remind everybody who's joining us today that you should have received on email a feedback survey. Please do take a couple of minutes to fill that in, because we're constantly looking to make sure that we provide the best possible kind of webinars and events for you. So you can take a couple of minutes to do that, that would be great. In terms of, again, I'm going to take a couple of questions together because I think they're really interesting. Adam alluded to, so Annette has asked this about something Adam alluded to, looking to the bigger picture and longer term developments like environmental change. And what she's asked is to all our panel members is, do any of you, or did any of you, use scenario development or scenario planning approaches in your kind of strategy work to test shorter term options against longer term shifts and trends? I know, Ellie, this was something maybe you said you don't do as much, or so it'll be interesting to hear about that. And alongside that, from Peter, also, do panel members use the government's public value framework when they're doing their strategy work? And what are your thoughts on that? So again, I'm going to, Alex, I'll come to you first on these. You probably do both of those, I would have thought.
Yeah, so I think using scenario-based planning is really, really helpful. I suppose I'd break it into two categories. The bigger, more exploratory scenario thinking for setting the longer term goals and visions through the strategy creation. So really understanding the external drivers, the internal drivers, the what ifs, the ambiguity, so it could look a bit like this and it could look a bit like that, and creating that framework of different sort of future worlds to be able to say, well, if it was like this, what would we do? If it was like this, what would we do? And then coming down into the more, how do we take strategic decisions that are slightly shorter term? I think tools like wargaming and causal modelling are really important, where you can understand, so if we've got a system and we're a bit clearer about the parameters of that system, can we test some of these decisions through it to understand, is there 80-20 gains here, or are there unintended consequences that we can't see? And I think having those two approaches and deploying them at the right time is really, really important.
Great, thanks. Ellie?
So yeah, scenario planning I have got increasingly fascinated with. I think we have a tension in the public sector. We set strategies and then we're very driven by the cycle of spending reviews and bidding for money, and then producing the plan that shows how you're going to spend that money and drive out the deliverables. So we have a single plan focus, and we do less of using our strategy as it's our guiding North Star. You know, what the world changes around us, so how do we adjust year on year in the parameters in which we're working with the financial context and the external context in which we're working. What do we do this year that takes us towards that end goal? And I think, you know, I've been niggling at DWP, how do we get better at using a few key scenarios within that? And that's particularly, you know, in that kind of, we talked, didn't we, about political change and what does political change do and what might it bring? Well, brilliant, when it comes to an election, what might the options be in different election outcomes? But we don't use it consistently day to day. So definitely something kind of I'm curious about and trying to do more of.
Thank you. Adam, do you use scenario planning? And you already mentioned about public value and, you know, value for money. But...
Yeah, I think we use scenarios in a few different ways. In December 2017, we published a sort of a longer term trends document called Connecting the Country. So that sense of, for the strategic road network, what are those sorts of changes we might see over a much longer time period that enables us to say, well, therefore, what might we do in particular road periods? I mentioned as well the importance of looking at the whole strategy in the round, and you know, clearly really important that you, under different investment scenarios and different sort of outcomes, one sort of looks at the whole package in different sort of scenarios. So we do that as well. But would echo the point that it's really important we don't get too sort of stuck on one long-term vision. One does need to be able to react quickly when something comes higher up particularly the political agenda, and respond to that. Just to add to the public value point, I mean, absolutely, I think increasingly this is a really important way of looking at things, not talking in a very economic terms. Value for money and high benefit cost ratios are really powerful tools, but not a good way of communicating publicly. To be able to say, we directly support these sorts of jobs, those sorts of skills, spending money directly in these communities is much more meaningful to if you like, real people that might be thinking about what this means for them than you know, we get a 2-to-1 return on investment at a billions of pounds level.
Great, thanks very much, Adam. Chris, we started with you, so I'm going to come and end with you. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here as well, but you might not be able to fit all of this in. There's been a question asked specifically for you as well around how did you manage to bring down, that you mentioned right at the beginning in your presentation, bringing down 300 deliverables down to kind of 100. If you're able to say just in 30 seconds, roughly what you used in kind of prioritization criteria, that would be great. But my assumption is when it comes to scenario planning, this is something that you're familiar with, but I'd welcome your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so scenario planning, clearly we do a lot of. I mean, notwithstanding whatever strategy we have, the government lays on us a number of tasks that we have 24/7. So it might be having X thousand of soldiers ready to respond to a national crisis, COVID, flooding, whatever it happens to be, at a certain notice to move, through to being able to conduct the sort of operation we did in 2003 in Kuwait and Iraq. And what we need to make sure as we create our strategy, and this is what we do, you know, we say, okay, in 3 years' time, what effect is a strategy going to have on delivering those outputs? Because they're going to be broadly the same. And that allows us to work out whether we're on track, where the risks are, and how we're going to mitigate them. So it's absolutely crucial for us. And I love the fact that Alex is talking about wargaming. It demonstrates he spent much too much time with us. So on the other question about prioritization, how we neck down deliverables, part of it was because by creating only 5 strategic objectives and 13 exco objectives, what it demonstrated, first of all, was that we had 300 deliverables, many of which were the same, but in different stovepipes. So we were able to strike those out pretty quickly. Some of the other deliverables, frankly, weren't smart in the vernacular, and frankly added no value at all. And some were sort of nice to haves, but didn't even get onto the could bracket, let alone the should and the must. So we were able to strike those out. But ultimately what it came down to, and Alex was in the room with us, was some very sweaty days with my directors going through hundreds of deliverables, going no, no, yes, no. And that's what it goes back to, boringly, the leadership and the responsibility that I hold and my directors hold. And I go back to the point, without making Alex blush, that having a different view in the room was incredibly helpful, because it tested us where we might have accepted a yes when actually it wasn't necessary. But Alex may have something to add, I don't know.
Alex, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that's an excellent summary. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We have just about run out of time. I mean, the discussion went so quickly, and thank you everyone for your brilliant questions coming in. I would just like to say a huge thank you to our panel, to Adam, to Chris, to Ellie, and to Alex. With so much going on, really grateful that you've given up so much of your time. I think really, really informative and useful advice there that people watching can actually take back into their organisations and help them in the work that they are doing. Just to let everybody know, there will be a link with a video of this discussion, so you can share it with your colleagues or catch up on anything that you might have missed today. And there'll also be an article sent around with some of the key messages from today. I'd finally like to say a big thanks again to Alex and to PA Consulting for being the knowledge partner today. That was really great. And it just leaves me to say, I hope everybody has a really good rest of the day. And I hope to see you on another one of these webinars very soon in the future. Thanks so much to our panel. Thanks so much to everybody listening. Have a great day. Thanks a lot.